South Korean commander. But it's unclear when this will happen, since there is no deadline put on the transition plan. Now, I haven't mentioned, I guess, the other big leg of the deterrence posture, which is the U.S. nuclear umbrella. As we all know, the credibility of this U.S. nuclear umbrella has been debated publicly recently with the development of nuclear weapons and long-range ballistic missile capabilities by North Korea. And while that is the most acute threat, and I think most public threat we see, if we look at the current security environment, North Korea and China can threaten the alliance through multiple ways and in multiple domains, including in the space and cyber domains. And they also threaten throughout the spectrum of competition and conflict, so during peacetime and wartime, sort of degrading previous notions of these two, armistice time versus wartime. I think this is reflected in a recent national intelligence estimate that was declassified in the United States that said that North Korea is most likely pursuing coercive diplomacy against the alliance with its nuclear weapons. Now, on the nuclear side, it can do this through threatening the United States and South Korea with nuclear attack, maybe presenting what some term a Seattle for Seoul scenario for the United States. But below the nuclear realm, it also states the coercive diplomacy happens because while nuclear is maybe holding deterrence at the high level, at lower levels, North Korea probes through great strategic level, so it can probe and attack at lower levels and threaten the alliance that way. Through this method of coercive diplomacy, I think we see the US-ROK alliance must adapt to address this range of threats, because the nuclear threat does not exist on its own. Moving to China, who also uses coercive diplomacy throughout competition and conflict, and using non-military tools. I think recently we have seen this through economic coercion in response to the THAAD deployment, and fitting into what some Chinese literature calls three warfares, which includes psychological warfare, public opinion warfare, and legal warfare, or lawfare. But of course, China is also developing on the military side, with Xi Jinping declaring that they will develop a world-class military by 2050, pursuing capability development in really all domains, and increasingly being able to threaten the United States in multiple domains. The most concerning outcome of this could potentially be a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. This is much debated and much discussed in the United States about what would happen. It's likely that China already has overmatch over Taiwanese forces, but a U.S. intervention would significantly change that calculus for China. Now, while this isn't maybe a direct threat for the US-ROK alliance, it still needs to be thought about. Because if there is war in Taiwan and the U.S. intervenes to defend Taiwan, this could mean U.S. forces potentially flowing from Korea down to Taiwan. And it could mean that North Korea, maybe not launching an all-out attack, but probing the alliance, similar to what happened in the 1960s when U.S. and South Korean forces were heavily committed to the Vietnam War. But now North Korea is able to not just provoke through small-scale artillery or infantry attacks, but in multiple domains and multiple means, and the alliance must adapt to this. In the United States, this new security environment and how to adapt to it has been recognized, and the Biden administration has introduced integrated deterrence, which the national security strategy defines as the seamless combination of capabilities to prevent potential adversaries at the cost of hostile activities outweigh their benefits. And this needs integration across all domains, regions, whole of government, and allies and partners. So obviously the US-ROK alliance is included in that, and this is done to better shape adversary perceptions of risks and cost of action against core US interests at any time and across any domain. I don't think this is really new from deterrence literature, but it is a way to sort of force through the entire US government this thinking of having to respond to a changed security environment. On the military side, the U.S. Army has rolled out an operational concept called multi-domain operations. Again, this is not necessarily new. It has been in development for a while, but it was defined in doctrine last year as the combined armed employment of joint and Army capabilities to create and exploit relative advantage that achieve objectives, defeat enemy forces, and consolidate gains on behalf of joint force commanders. And it emphasizes that now all military operations are multi-domain operations to try and force military commanders to get out of service-specific thinking, domain-specific thinking, or even previous joint thinking. And it aims to achieve what is called convergence, which is essentially the combination of these capabilities to defeat enemy forces and push them back. Now, if you think in all domain, this isn't just taking hills. This includes being able to defeat enemy forces and formations in cyber, in space, and in all domains. So what can the US-ROK alliance do? These are still new concepts for the United States that we're working through, but I think it's imperative for the alliance to think about this and think about how we will adapt it. The first thing I would suggest is taking maybe some lessons from multilateral perspectives. NATO has probably been more forward on this than the US-ROK alliance. They've had a nuclear planning group for a long time to address strategic deterrence questions. But even in this multi-domain, they recognized in 2015, or acknowledged in 2015, that cyber threats can invoke collective, simply the United States providing deterrence. I also think from a multilateral perspective, integrated deterrence and multi-domain operations depends on closer regional security building, closer relations with Japan, with Australia, with India, with Southeast Asian countries, in order to be able to integrate across domains and across regions. Bilaterally, we saw the Washington Declaration this spring, which had a lot of focus on the North Korean nuclear threat, but you can still see multi-domain language in it, talking about South Korean support for conventional support for U.S. nuclear operations, and also both sides saying they will bring the full range of capabilities to the alliance, to bolster the alliance's defense posture. The Nuclear Consultative Group, or NCG, was formed through the Washington Declaration, and again, I think this is probably the right name and focus to address public concerns about this, but I would encourage the NCG has to also take a multi-domain and integrated approach to deterrence, not just looking at nuclear weapons or nuclear threats on their own, but understanding how the adversary is presenting a more comprehensive threat environment. And finally, continuing to pursue the conditions-based OPCOM transition plan. This not only will provide more capability for South Korea to do multi-domain operations, but it focused on ROK ability to command in multi-domain. It will help them employ that. This not only helps South Korean forces, but helps the alliance be able to respond to contingencies such as one in Taiwan. So in conclusion, I think I'm optimistic. I think the alliance can and will adapt to the threat environment as it has in the past, but this is arguably a more dangerous threat environment than it has faced in the past. And I would end by encouraging that as an alliance, a desired end state needs to be discussed. That deterrence is a means, but it is not an end. So to think about what lies beyond deterrence. And if we can find a commonly defined end state, this will actually help to implement things like integrated deterrence and multi-domain operations to help them get us to that desired end state. I'll end it. Thank you.